Now, a note to keep in mind right now, or something to keep in mind right now, is the fact that there are places in this book that are absolutely densely packed with information. Like this first page, especially this first paragraph here, and especially the first sentence. There's a lot of information packed into there, hidden into that. And it can be overwhelming because if you actually really start digging into just this first paragraph here, you can be like, wow, I found this, I found this, I found this. Is this important? There's so much stuff. And then you think to yourself, how in the world is this entire book packed this densely with so much information? And the answer is, it's not. There are places in the book where there are clusters of information. And then there are other places in the book where there's very, very little information. Okay? So don't psych yourself out, I guess I could say, or scare yourself by thinking that the entire book is extraordinarily densely packed with information, because it's not. But there are places, like here on the first page, where there's just a lot of information to be found. So, I get a lot of people telling me, there's no possible way Gann was as smart as people think he was to hide all this stuff in this book. And the answer to that is there's a lot of stuff hidden in this book, but it's not as hard to find, and it wasn't as hard to make as you might think. Another example of information given to us right here is the Lone Star State of Texas. Lone Star State of Texas, if you don't know anything about that, that's something just like Texarkana you would want to look up. And one of the things that you would find is that the emblem for the Lone Star State of Texas is a 5-pointed star, a pentagram. Okay? Now, if you look up the Lone Star State of Texas, that phrase in this book, The Tunnel Thru the Air, you'll find that it shows up only 2 places. It shows up here on page 1, and then it shows up on page 289, which is 288 pages apart. And that's a clue, quite obviously. Now, I know everyone's like, 288. That's twice, there's that 2 times, 144. But it also helps us understand, when we know about Texas, know that that Lone Star is a pentagram, that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words in the Lone Star State of Texas. And then we realize that he says 8 miles west of Texarkana, about 8 miles. If you have underlying information in astrology or astronomy, then you would realize that there's a Venus and Earth or Sun cycle. Venus and Sun as viewed from Earth, but Venus and Earth as viewed from the Sun. That is 5 conjunctions of the Venus and Sun taking place in 8 years. Okay, so while that's not blatantly obvious right away, if you have this underlying information, you can piece this together. That's why it's a really good idea to not make snap judgments and say, something like 69, page 69, that's a reference to the sign of Cancer, because it looks like the glyph that's used for the sign of Cancer. And then that, in your mind, you're done with it. Well, the reason 69 shows up, there's more than one reason, actually. And it's a very, very important one. And it's not just to do with the sign of Cancer, not just to do with the sign of Cancer. So if you make up your mind about something and then that just stays like that forever, and you don't let further discovery change what you think about something, then that can impede your progress tremendously. Think of it this way. Robert Gordon in this book had a perception of what he expected Major Motors to do. And then in the great campaign of Major Motors, which was, page 197, something like that, he discovers a new time factor which changes the way he looks at what he's expecting to happen to Major Motors stock. So before, he was expecting it to just basically hover around the same price and then go down. And then after discovery of that time factor, he expected it to move up significantly and then move down. So let new information change your mind if it's good information. 8 miles shows up, and this is a clue to the 8 years. You're like, okay, I got that. I see what you're saying, Gann. Okay, good. But then you have to take into account that he just said 8 miles. And that might be a method of hiding other information. So in other words, instead of 8 miles, this is 8 years in this particular hidden piece of information. So it might stand to reason to assume that if he gives you another number with miles, that he could be talking about years. Okay, so there is a point in the book that we'll get to in a little bit where we can confirm this. So in other words, you would want to look up miles and research miles. What else would you want to do with it? Maybe find the numerology of it, right? Such as the Lone Star State of Texas has 5 words, like I said. The numerology of those words is 70, which just might be important. Okay. So let's move on. We see here on page 3, the very first Bible verse that's quoted here in the story is 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 16 through 18. What number does that remind you of right there? Well, there are 418 pages in this book, right? But there's actually other information that's being given to you right there. So that might be something to look into. Pay attention to the Bible verses, because the Bible verses, the actual numbers of the Bible verses themselves, are just as important, if not more so, than what it actually says.